Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the noontime show today. We'd like to thank Ray Rickman, as he usually does, coming in giving his big view today on education in the city of Providence and the upcoming mayoral race. We'd also like to thank a usual Friday frequent flyer, Bob Whitcomb, GoLocal columnist, joining us.
Fly and crash.
Fly and crash.
Fly and crash, no parachute.
So, as we were saying before you came on, not a lot to talk about today.
No, it's a quiet day. Just a rainy day in Providence.
Thoughts on the Cavanaugh hearing yesterday?
Well, it actually didn't surprise me that much, except for Cavanaugh's rage. How much of that was practiced and theatrical, and how much of that was real, I don't know. I thought that was pretty stunning for a guy who's going to be in the Supreme Court. I'm assuming he's going to get pushed
that
through.
seems to be the sort of
I don't think he should have
reaction.
done that. He'll get on the Supreme Court, I would think, probably. The chances are, here we are talking on Friday, and who knows, but I think that left a bad taste. I think that was a mistake on his part to seem so partisan. He also, of course, inevitably dragged in the Clintons. He said the whole thing was revenge for his ferocious work and Ken Starr's investigation in the 1990s against Clinton, including Clinton's there's some obscene word which I won't use, but Clinton's dog-like qualities. And he blamed it on that, and I just thought I was very much taken aback by that. I think a lot of people were, including Republican friends of mine.
Certainly the pundits, and it was exactly, you hit the nail on the head, that sort of departure from judicial temperament.
Right, and he suggested, once you get a lifetime job, who knows what might happen. We've had some interesting, Hugo Black, who was a member of the KKK, and Harry Blackmun, I think it was a Republican nominee, Earl Warren, very famous liberal Chief Justice, had been sort of a red hunting, I believe, California Attorney General, then governor. So when you get a lifetime job, it can change the way you see. But we saw a lot of rage in Cavanaugh, which people who knew him when he was drunk talked about. There's a lot of he's very well practiced at acting congenial and charming and all that. You don't get up the greasy pole that high without being able to at least pretend a certain affability. But I think what we saw there, unless that was just totally for show business reasons at the urging of Trump, I think it was unsettling because we did not see judicial temperament there. But what Dr. Ford said didn't particularly surprise me. I think everybody believed that something happened to her, but there's nothing really admissible that could really, could legally imperil Judge Cavanaugh.
So I think it was Piers Morgan who had the observation that it was just a sad day for the U.S. to see what the two of them were put through on the public stage.
And it was, I suppose, a circus. This goes way back. There have been unpleasant Supreme Court nominee hearings before, obviously, going back to Judge Bork. In the late 80s, a very conservative nominee of President Reagan, who lost his bid to be on the Supreme Court. The Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas affair was pretty bad. This was probably worse, believe it or not. This was more, what's the word? It seemed even more venomous than that.
And there was some speculation too. There were some observations, and probably folks who obviously knew of Clarence Thomas's record prior to the Supreme Court and after. There were some folks that said that they thought he became his views changed slightly, having gone through that process, and that
he's always very
dug his heels in more.
Up to Cavanaugh, the most right-wing nominee. The problem with Clarence Thomas was that he was not particularly well prepared. He'd briefly been a U.S. District Court judge. Kavanaugh has been an appeals court judge for quite some time, and he certainly has a much more impressive resume. And until the outburst that we saw yesterday, and then throwing in some observations, people knew he was drunk. He seemed to be a kind of a judicial character, kind of calm, considered, pleasant, thoughtful, and all that. Less so now.
Well, it's interesting because folks were talking that, judges are people, judges are human. That's no two ways about it.
Tremendous pressure. He's got like 60 million people watching him.
But they mentioned the fact that usually that sort of, if you have outbursts or that sort of personality, it tends to happen behind closed doors and not really in the public sphere like that.
That's right. Very unusual. And I think we'll probably never know how much of that was a prepared outrage and how much of that was real.
So what do you think of, it was unveiled earlier this week, it was in the interview process with Judge Cavanaugh, that Sheldon Whitehouse's office brought to light an allegation from a Rhode Islander regarding an alleged incident in Newport from the 80s.
I wish they had not talked about that. I think this lady, the third person, I think her stuff should be looked in. What's her name? Swittick or something like that?
Yeah, there was the fourth one.
That's a real name, a real person. She's done a lot of work for the federal government. She passed a lot of security. This just seems to have the consistency of a cumulus cloud. And I found that a little bit troubling. I would not have brought it up unless there was more substance.
The senator's office, replied when we reached out to them that, well, they got the allegation, they referred it to the FBI, and then later, whomever was purportedly associated with the Twitter account along with it, then recanted it. But as you said, cumulus cloud puff up in the air. But for a small part of the news cycle, it seemed to be part of that snowball trying to spiral down the road to take out Cavanaugh. And then, poof, it's gone. As you said, should there have been more vetting from the senator's office pertaining to this allegation? I
think so. I don't think I would have mentioned it until they had more information. And Senator Whitehouse, of course, is a former U.S. attorney and state attorney general, knows about these things. So I'm not sure how much of this was somebody in his staff getting carried away, how much of this was the senator, but I wish we hadn't heard anything about it unless there were a name, date, place.
Because it certainly came up in the interview right before the actual hearing itself.
The other allegations, they're real. They seem to be real people
because of the names associated with it. Well, it's interesting because Josh and I were talking before, and we might have discussed this. When Ford brought forth these she wanted to be anonymous. With,
and I can understand that. I mean, who wants to be grilled in front of 80 million people?
Well, I think there might have been, too, the sort of thought that she could remain. And again, these anonymous tips, I really think this harkens back to the New York Times deciding to write a piece from an anonymous piece.
Which I oppose, as you know.
And we talked about this.
I don't think they should have done that. I'm not sure it's connected with that at all, but I think we always have to be very, very leery of anonymous sourcing because even if they're real, it undermines credibility in government and in media.
We don't want to undermine the
credibility any further than it already is. I just don't think you can come forward with a charge without a name. And whoever wrote that piece, whether it was General Mattis or somebody else, should have made her or his, it's probably his views known to the public, had a press conference, discussed it, and that would have had, I think, a far more benign effect in controlling the worst outrages of the Trump administration.
Let's go from national politics to local. Let's talk about the bus strike, day 2.
Yeah, it's too bad. The only area, it's just a terrible time of year for this, just incredibly inconvenient, lots of social disruption, some economic disruption. I see the big issue is whether they're going to have a 401k or a regular pension. I'm sympathetic with the desire to have a regular pension, since 401ks are far less reliable. But I just wish it had been possible for the mayor's office and for other city officials to have, what's the right word, to have predicted this might happen and make contingency plans.
Again, we're on day 2. It doesn't seem to be any budging on either side. Now, we've spoken with First Student extensively. They do not do pensions in any other city.
They've had financial problems, I understand. They apparently are not rolling in money.
Well, I'll tell you, there's the spin machines are in high speed on both sides of the equation. On the Teamster side, they say that, well, UPS is helping shoring up the pension fund, and we've never missed a payment, and we're actually in fine shape because First Student did point out the perilous shape that there is in. And on the flip side, they're pointing to First Student obviously not putting forth what they've agreed to. And one of the things they said, too, is that they made 401k promises in the past that they've had to take them to court to hold them to. So I don't know
the whole pension issue is very serious, because especially when the stock market goes down and people are reminded how fragile it is. But, of course, regular pensions can be very fragile, too, as GoLocal as spearheaded the concern about that. The other thing I'm kind of curious about, with this whole business of using private contractors for the school buses, is that a good thing or not, as opposed to the town or the city? When I was growing up, when they finally brought public school buses to my little town, you know, they were owned by the school.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
And
well,
the school superintendent was in charge of them.
You saw today, GoLocal did report that the mayor's office has held the extension of the contract. It is such in limbo right now. There is the potential the city could fire them at any time, but it appears not to be the case.
Then what? Are they going to use armored personnel carriers to take these kids around? Boats? You know, what are they going to do? How about all these jump bikes around?
That's what the
That's
young
it.
girl
Buy
was,
about
no.
20,000 jump bikes.
That's what the young student, the 13-year-old, you know, I was first to report that this child had been hit because I literally was going back and forth between Bishop and MLK yesterday to get a sense of what the traffic looked like. I saw the cop car there, and I said, are you here for traffic purposes for King? No, a child got hit. Comes out later, she was riding a jump bike.
Yeah, boy. And they're all over the place, especially in the richer parts of town.
Well, I don't know. I think I'm okay with jump bikes. I don't know. We have not seen the return of the bird.
Not great in snow and ice.
We have not seen the return of the bird yet.
Right, that's right.
Someone on a electronic scooter was struck and killed in D.C. this week. So I don't know if that puts a little hamper in their possible.
Well, yeah, I mean,
either.
you'd have to look out for things such as they've got to be wearing helmets and stuff like that. What happens if it's slippery out, you know?
Who's to blame?
So I think the whole idea of private contracts of providing transportation should be reviewed.
Okay, look at it from let's look outside the box.
Right.
I want to bring up, I want to tell you who was here before you, Bob, and talk a little bit about this. It's something GoLocal has written about before. Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, the subsidiary here.
OxyContin.
Rose Technology. I had the artist who created a 10-foot heroin spoon that he, along with the gallery owner, this is Dominic Esposito and Fernando Luis Alvarez in Connecticut, planned and delivered and dropped in front of Purdue Pharma back in June. Fernando was arrested.
You mean down in Stanford,
down in
the
Stanford.
headquarters?
Yeah, kind of a sort of to really make the public display of outrage.
Despicable marketing. And these relationships they forge with doctors to prescribe this stuff, and they're handing this stuff out like bubble gum.
So both of them were outraged. They're going to other states now as well. And Fernando wanted to publicly debate Governor Raimondo as to her contributions from the Sackler family. Though she's repeatedly told GoLocal why she won't return them, and her office says that contributions have no bearing on her policy or decision making. Now, she's been at the forefront, like other governors and elected officials, trying to fight the opioid epidemic. But he was so incensed and fired up that she would keep this money. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know. What are other governors doing on this? Do you know? Because I'm sure they're handing out the contributions like Hershey bars.
Well, if they're all jumping off the bridge, should she join them?
I think it's such a tainted company, so corrupt. Many people have died because of their product, perhaps tens of thousands. That I would give it back. I would give it back. How much is it?
Around 10, 15,000.
Yeah, let's give it back. I mean, it'd be a problem if they gave her, half the money she has. She'd have to close up the campaign. I mean, not seriously. I mean, you get into the realm of practicality. When somebody's giving you so much money, you send the money back and then go home.
Well, we've talked about the slippery slope. If it starts there, then people are going to start asking about every other. But very incensed since I'd wanted to debate her on the issue. Do you have a cheat sheet about what we're going to talk about
Well, no,
this
I think
weekend?
one thing is you probably saw, and GoLocal's been fun, they're going to cut back on the herring, catching the herring, which is a good idea, because herring is sort of the base crop of a lot of other very, very important fish. Very important to the ecology that they start to protect the herring crop. So I talk about that. I talk a little bit, I mentioned the Massachusetts State Police overtime scandal, which is simply a reminder of how much overtime is abused by law enforcement people.
That
Huge.
is for sure.
Here and everywhere. A very serious problem. I also talk about something called, the social health index, which was instigated by a piece in the Boston Globe by the Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter, you've probably heard of, and talking about a decline in U.S. conditions, U.S. living conditions, which is very interesting. And I talk about the International Sea Power Symposium, which I attended last week, and used it as just another excuse to talk about how wonderful the War College is. I mean, there I was able to talk informally with the head of the Chief of Naval Operations, the head of the Brazilian Navy, the head of the French Navy, the head of the Australian Navy, and to talk about the Endeavour, which they seem to be very excited about. This is Captain Cook's ship that was scuttled in near Newport in the late 1770s. So that was kind of fun. And let me see, what else? It just goes on and on, these subjects. It's just relentless.
As I said, there's probably nothing to talk about, but it seemed like, you know, certainly Cavanaugh dominated this
yes,
week.
I certainly talk about Cavanaugh, saying some of the things I said. Getting back to Cavanaugh again, my interest in this has been sort of sociological. He represents a very privileged background, and I'm fascinated as to how does sort of his privilege, his upbringing in this cause, how has this affected his temperament and his success? And so I ruminate on that. I was actually much more interested in that than in the
I think
Ford,
one could probably
Ford
write a
thing.
book about that.
Oh yeah,
a psychoanalysis
of that
this process.
And because of what it says about where America is now, while this spectacle has not been particularly edifying, it has been educational. Absolutely.
If not edifying, educational. Well, Bob Whitcomb, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to come into the studio.
See you soon.
And thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, we did pop up earlier, and we'll be back next Monday with Josh Finn.